Hare Krishna, everyone. Welcome to the our first Facebook Live event that we're trying to do here. And the topic today is materially successful and spiritually strong. For those of you that I haven't met, my name is Raseshwar Madhava. And what we'll do, how the format of this session will go today is that we'll start with invocation prayers, and then what we're going to do from there is I will just take a few minutes to tell you a little bit more about myself and my background, and then from there I have a few questions that have already come in that we can try to address, and then what people can do wherever they're logged in. We have someone here, Dhruv Prabhu is here, is helping us as the moderator, and he will be facilitating the questions that are coming in over Facebook. So if there are questions that are coming along the way, or if there's comments that you want to make, please do so, and we'll try to address as much as we can. So I'm really grateful for that you've taken some time out to tune in, and I hope we can have a conversation here that's helpful and can be inspiring to all of us. So first of all, we'll just start off with invocation. Om Gyantimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chaksurmitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadanti Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuda Parakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Sha Shri Rupam Sagarjatam Sahagana Lalitam Shri Vishakamitam Sha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagapate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanshna Gaurangi Brade Vrindaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpa Turubhyascha Kripa Sundara Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, everyone. So, thank you again for tuning in. I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about how this event was inspired. This was actually an idea that came about. So for those of you who don't know, Aditya in Calgary, he's one of our really very inspired younger devotees who is balancing so much in terms of his studies and his spiritual life. And we're able to help him as devotees. We're able to encourage him in his spiritual life, and he's been getting a lot of questions from some of you. And since some of these questions were coming out, we thought, why not try to take the opportunity to have a forum where many people can ask questions and try to benefit from the answers. So that's actually why we're trying to do it on Facebook. So this is actually an this is actually hopefully a pilot for something that we'll try to do more often, where we'll have different topics that we can actually speak on, and that we can do it in this way so that people can tune in from wherever they are, and even though they're not in Toronto or close by, and maybe they're in Toronto and not at the temple, where we can still try to take advantage of the different information, and hopefully use this actually as a way to train the younger generation of devotees throughout Canada, and hopefully maybe even other parts of the world, because Prabhupada, he was very much an advocate for using the different types of technology in Krishna service So this is actually our small, humble attempt to try to do so. And we hope that, forgive us if there's any glitches or on our side. This is our first time that we're trying it out. And please, we'll be happy to receive all your feedback and comments at the end. And we'll go from there. So today I'll just start off by speaking essentially just a little bit about myself, because most of you maybe I've not had a chance to meet. And I'll tell you why we named this topic the way we did. So as mentioned, my name is Raseshwar Madhava Das, and right now I'm living in Toronto. And if you had a chance to read the profile, I actually am working as a pediatrician right now. And one of the reasons why we chose this topic is that I actually joined more seriously my Christian consciousness. It was now 13 years ago, and I was living in London. And at that time I was doing a master's. And so I feel that over the last 13 years, I really tried diligently as best as I could to try to integrate what Prabhupada is trying to tell us in his books and what he's trying to teach us, and then also the teachings of the Sampradaya and the Acharyas with actually our day-to-day life. And so a lot of people call it our material life, but I'm hoping today what we can touch upon is just life issues that affect all of us as a younger generation of devotees, and try to have as an open conversation as possible, because I feel that the more we actually speak about our challenges, the whole point is that we've come together as a group to try to encourage each other. That's actually the main purpose actually for me to come and try to share something, not only from my experience, but also the advice and the guidance that I've been given by my seniors and gurus as well on this topic. So just a little bit more about myself. So I grew up, I was born and grew up in Waterloo, which is an hour outside of Toronto. And then from there I finished high school and I went to McMaster for 4 years and I did health sciences there. And from there, the journey of spiritual life actually began. I was really lucky that I was born into a Vaishnava family. So my mom, she raised us as devotees of Krishna, but she took initiation in a different sampradaya, into the Pushti Marg sampradaya. And but still Krishna was there from the beginning. But specifically my initial connection and attachment to Krishna actually came through watching the Mahabharata. So this is actually initially, if we watch this story, Krishna is the feature of the Mahabharata story. But as a young boy, I'm sure many of you young people can relate. The main part I liked Krishna, but the main part that actually really I was really enthusiastic about was the war. Right? Everybody loves a good fight. And that's actually the part of the story that attracted me the most. And then what comes along when you watch the war, it comes the climax of the Gita is actually the conversation between Krishna and Arjuna, which is known as the Bhagavad Gita. So I watched that actually many times as a child growing up. And although I didn't actually at that age have any devotee association, that was really I can honestly say my connection to Krishna. And then I was really fortunate that I have an uncle, he lives in Chicago, and he was running the temple, the Hare Krishna temple there. So growing up, I used to spend all of my summers going every summer to Chicago, so all my Janmastamis were actually there in Chicago. So that's actually where my first connection came to Prabhupada and the devotees. And when I was younger, if you remember, there's a famous book by Prabhupada called King of Knowledge, or Raj Vidya. That was actually the first book that I read. And the reason why I read it was because I was just attracted to the cover of the picture. We may remember what that famous picture is. It's where Arjuna's sitting and looking at the universal form, offering his respects. So that's actually the picture that stayed with me from when I was even younger, and the only reason I picked up that book was was because of that, the picture on that book. And now I was really fortunate that I actually started reading Prabhupada's Gita, which is quite big. I started reading that book on my own, not without my parents' encouragement or anything. I started reading Prabhupada's Gita when I was 9 years old. And so you can imagine when you're 9 years old, it's a little bit difficult. It's a little bit difficult to take that book and to read it. And so I would actually sit with the Bhagavad Gita, and I would sit with an Oxford dictionary because I didn't know half of the term. I didn't know half of the words that were actually being used in the Gita. I didn't know what consciousness meant. I didn't know what lament meant. So many words. Every day I would read a page, and I would have this long list of words that I would be looking up in the dictionary day by day. And what's interesting is just maybe 3 or 4 months ago, I was cleaning our basement, and I found that same dictionary that I had from when I was 9. And what was in that pages was actually the list of words that I had written out that I needed to find from the Bhagavad Gita. So it was really just a flash from the past when I saw those words, and I really kind of saw where the journey began. So I consider it very fortunate that I was exposed to Krishna and Prabhupada at that age. And it's definitely said that when devotees or anybody has some connection to Krishna, that there's some sort of past, auspicious karma, right? Krishna says specifically that when Arjuna asks him, what if we're not able to finish this path in this lifetime? So Krishna says that you'll either be born into a family, an aristocratic family, so a wealthy family, or in a family of brahmanas to actually continue on the process, right? So this is, and I was very fortunate that I was born into a family through my mom, and she was a devotee that kind of planted the seed. And so the story moves on that between the ages of 9 and 12, I read the Bhagavad Gita diligently every day. But again, because I was so young and I read it so slowly. In about 2 or 3 years, I got through the first 400 pages of the Gita. So that, and then after 12 years old, I pretty much I closed it. And after that, I was still chanting. Again, I had good influence from my uncle when I would go see them in Chicago. But again, I'm here in outside of Toronto. Didn't have any association, and didn't have obviously my mom was encouraging, but she never pushed anything on us. So it was really everything was on my own endeavor. I remember my mom, she taught us the Hanuman Chalisa, my sister and I, when we were young, so I was chanting that very regularly. And so I went through my years between the ages of 12 all the way until throughout university, and I had this attraction for Krishna. I always traveled with a picture of Radha and Krishna wherever I went, and it was actually in Hamilton there. Then I applied to medical school, and like many times, people come to Bhakti when Krishna says there's 4 types of people to come to Krishna. And what is the first type? The first type is actually distressed, right? So there's a famous line that a brahmachari says. He says, the 4 types of people that come to Krishna in Kali Yuga are artho, 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 and artho. So he says distressed, more distressed, most distressed, the most distressed, right? So this is actually a lot of times the way we come to Krishna, because it's easier to actually reach out and to call out for Krishna when things aren't going well in our life, when things are actually smooth, when we're getting everything we want, everything's falling into place. We think, okay, life is actually pretty good. I'm doing well, and I'm working hard. I'm getting the fruits of all my work, and I'm feeling comfortable. But the thing is that we should always realize that both in the good times and the challenging times, this material world is actually described in the Shastra as dukkhalayam, so a place of actual dukkha or suffering. And a lot of times, one of the services that I have here in Toronto is that I host and I greet the new devotees that I come. And I say that when we've come to the material world, and we're actually, we've come for happiness. And that's like saying that we're going to a car dealership to buy groceries. we actually have an expectation that cannot be met. So that's the point, right? Is that we've come somewhere that we're all looking for happiness, and there's no problem with that, because as Jivatmas, we're actually Satchidananda. So we're actually always looking for that pleasure and that bliss. But the problem is that we've come to the wrong location for that, right? And so the reason why I bring that up is because I went, when I actually applied to medical school and I didn't get in, that was the biggest, it was as though I was standing on ground and the earth completely fell under me and I was just in a free fall. And I didn't know what I was going to do or where I was going to go. And you can imagine, for those of you who are in university or who have applied to some sort of professional program or master's program, I applied for a master's program in June that started in August. So now typically everyone usually applies for a program in January. And I applied in August for something that started in 2 months. And this is how, Krishna works in amazing ways. But in August, I get a letter of acceptance. And that took me all the way to London, England. And so that's actually why I went to London to live there. And I went there because I had no direction. And I thought, this is the only option I have, so I have to go. And so I went, and I thought to myself, if I go, there was all these anxieties. I never had anticipated doing this. I didn't know what was going to come of it. Would I lose my interest in being a doctor? Because for those of you that are kind of committed to any sort of school or professional school, it takes a lot of hard work and a lot of determination to be able to keep persisting on the goal, even though when we're not successful. So that's actually what took me out there, and I was still living the normal life that I was living throughout university. And I'll be very honest, I wasn't following all the 4 regulative principles before I actually met devotees. So I've seen what life is like. I had good karma, but again, when we are not in the connection with devotees, with Prabhupada and a lot of his teachings, we can actually think that we're living a pious life, but still not living by the principles that are actually laid out in the Shastra. So I'm there in London, and all of a sudden, one day, I see a poster for Bhagavad Gita study, and I think back to my childhood, and I think, gosh, I haven't opened the Gita since I was 12 years old. I'm gonna go. And so there's the first class before that, there was actually a talk by the Hindu Society. And I go there, and there's only 3 other people besides myself. And now these 3 people were actually all devotees who took care of the Krishna Conscious Club at the university. And after that talk of the 4 of us, so basically it was just me, and those 3 came. They told me after, the reason why they come to the Hindu Society talks is to look for people they can actually bring to their events. So that's what they did. They basically just sent an invitation to me. And that's, I thought, I haven't read the Gita and been connected to the Gita for a long time, let me go. Now what happened to me is the most life-changing experience I've ever had. And so I walk into this Bhagavad Gita class, and the person who's speaking is sitting at the front. And again, there's those couple of devotees that invited me. And then again, there was maybe one other person and myself. So really small room. We're in a room. If anybody can recall, when you're in university, they have small rooms where the teaching assistant has a small group. So they're really small rooms. We were in a room probably 10 feet, like less than 10 feet by 10 feet, very small. And this devotee speaks. And when he starts speaking the Bhagavad Gita, it was as though I had what every ounce of good fortune and karma I had fructified at that very moment, because it was as though 1,000 bricks had just hit me on the head. And immediately it was the purpose of life became crystal clear. And it was such a revolutionary change. He was speaking the Bhagavad Gita like I had never heard, and he wasn't even Indian body devotee. So when I saw him, I thought, this person didn't even grow up with the Indian culture that I grew up with, and he's speaking Bhagavad Gita, not even the best, the most incredible thing I ever heard come out of anybody's mouth was just flowing out of his mouth, and I was just completely taken aback. And I could really, at the end of that talk, I went up to the devotee. He gave me his contact information, and to this day, I'm still blessed actually that this devotee, his name is Bhuta Bhavana Prabhu. Some of you may know him in the UK. My whole spiritual life actually stands on his guidance. Is that he actually, to this day, 13 years ago, he's still my mentor and he's still helping me in my spiritual life. But the point is that I walked out of that class and I knew something significant had changed in my life. And a lot of times there's this famous story that for those of you who may know it, Bhakti Tirtha Swami, he's serving Prabhupada and Bhakti Tirtha Swami is having a dream. And he said, and he's serving Prabhupada and Prabhupada says, and people are knocking at the door. And Prabhupada tells Bhakti Tirtha Swami, open the door. And Bhakti Tirtha Swami is just busy serving Prabhupada, and he says, no, open the door. When Bhakti Tirtha Swami opens the door, in his dream, what's happening is hundreds and thousands of people are actually flowing through the door. And at that time, Bhakti Tirtha Swami is actually deciding on where he should go next to preach. So immediately in this dream, he received a vision from Prabhupada. He says, go here, and he says, as soon as you go here, there's hundreds and hundreds of people just ready to come to Krishna consciousness. And this was the point that this Bhuta Bhavana Prabhu, he was making this lecture. He says, the moment that a living entity comes into contact with a sincere devotee, he says their life will immediately change. Immediately change. And this was actually my experience. This was truly, truly my experience, that it was literally in a moment that my whole life kind of flashed before me. And the purpose of life became totally clear, and I changed my life instantly after that conversation. And that was 13 years ago, and I've never looked back since. And the way I actually, because as you know, I mentioned that I work with kids. And to me, actually, the most inspiring devotees, when I see practicing Krishna consciousness, it's not actually the senior devotees are inspiring and they've given their life and they're very respectful. But I'm always really inspired by the young kids. Why? Because they are given such a great opportunity at such a young age. So this is one thing that I want to encourage everyone. For those of the people that have been given some aspect of Krishna consciousness when they were young, please value it and take advantage, because now I look at myself and I'm old, and I'm actually, I consider myself so old. When I see these young people, I thought, gosh, I've wasted so many years of my life. Look at these young people. They're really actually taking advantage of the good fortune they have. So one of my messages that I want to send across is that we've been given something so amazing. Please, if you need a reminder of how great what we have been given, please, I will be happy to have a conversation in more detail later. So that's essentially a little bit of kind of how I ended up coming to Krishna consciousness more and kind of practicing on a more serious basis. But then everybody understands that when they come to Krishna consciousness, that we still have to actually be and live in the world. So I was finishing my master's. All the devotees there were really supportive there in London. And they said, how is the Toronto temple? One devotee asked me many months after. And I said, actually, I've never gone. And they were all shocked. They said, and in Europe, when you have March break or reading week, they have a month of reading week. So when I went home, I had to come back to Toronto for reading week. They said, please do not come back here until you've actually gone to the Toronto temple. That was an instruction. So I go to the Toronto temple for the first time. Many of you don't know this story. I walked into the temple room, and I didn't know the times of the darshan, and it's a dark room. It's only myself in the room. And we're walking into the room, and I thought, okay, I've come here, and I won't get darshan of the deities, but I made an attempt to come. And you wouldn't believe it. This is how amazing Krishna is. I'm walking out of the temple room. I take my last step onto the floor outside of the temple room. And what happens? The door opens and the shank, the conch, it blows. And that's actually the start of Aarti time. So essentially, Krishna basically starts Aarti right as I was about to leave. And essentially after that, obviously, I'm the only person in the temple room. I get a personal darshan of Radha Kirchor Gopinath. And incidences like this, when they happen to in your life, you can't help but develop such amazing, faith in the Lord because of how personal He is in all of our lives. And so I took darshan, then started getting more involved with the youth here. But my life, because I was still determined to practice medicine, it took me in a lot of directions. So after being in London, I wanted to come back to school around in the Toronto area. I interviewed for medical school again, and I didn't get in. So again, another setback or failure. But what happened was I got into medical school outside of Canada, and I ended up going to school in Grenada. So I was there for 2 years, and that was definitely a challenge. You can imagine if for those of us that have been practicing spiritual life, I was basically a new bhakta, maybe 8 months, and then I go into a situation where I actually have no devotee association at all, right? And so Krishna tests our faith in different ways, but that was the first opportunity I had, was to actually see, okay, how much I could see Krishna is basically testing us. Do you want this for me, or do you actually, because when we're in the association of devotees, sometimes devotional life can be a lot easier. Why? Because we're being encouraged by the environment around us, and that's really important. But we will all probably find that at some times in our spiritual life, we're going to be alone, physically alone. And in those times, that's actually the greatest, we may see that as a challenge, but actually I can say after having multiple occasions like this in the last 10 years, that it's actually the greatest opportunity to make to really reach out and call out and make advancement in our spiritual life. So I was there for 2 years on my own, and had obviously some of the questions that come up today are around how do we kind of balance being in different situations. We can talk about that later. And then after that, I was in New York. So I was really lucky when I was in New York finishing my medical school that I actually got to live close to a temple. And that was really the formative years. Many of you may know the Bhakti Center. That's actually where I got to stay at for 2 years. And that's where I had an opportunity to spend more time with disciples of His Holiness Radhanand Swami and spend more time with Radhanand Swami himself, and really took inspiration and shelter. And then the end of my 2 years in New York are coming, and I wanted two things. I wanted to either go back home to Toronto to pursue my residency, which is specialization training, either be back closer to devotees in Toronto, and if I couldn't get into that, then I'd rather just stay in New York because I had devotee association there, and everything was good. And what happened, Krishna didn't arrange anything for me in Toronto, and all the interviews He arranged for me in New York, I got rejected from all of them. So now I'm in a situation where I don't have, again, I have no footing. So there's for those who know it, it's kind of a chaotic process by how you can try to find a residency position after that. But eventually I ended up, there was, in pediatrics, they have, after everyone gets matched to their residency spot, there's a matching system that allows anybody around the world to apply for what's left over. So it's called the second round. And there was basically 2 spots for pediatrics, which is what I wanted to do across Canada. There was one at Queen's in Kingston, and there was one in St. John's in Newfoundland. And at this point, you're applying against hundreds of people. So I got the interview at Queen's, and I was happy to go there because it was the closest option that I had at home. I couldn't stay in New York now. I knew I had to leave because none of those options worked out. So then I interviewed there. I thought it went well. And in Newfoundland, because it was so far away from Toronto, they actually allowed me to interview over the phone. And I thought to myself, wow, this is not going to be, for anybody who's done an interview, a phone interview is not actually the ideal way to interview for such a big position and such a big spot. And again, because I had gone through so much rejection in the last so many years, I did the interview and I just thought, well, let's see what Krishna has in store. And of all the options that worked out, and now you can see that Krishna takes us into specific directions for specific reasons. But the place at Queen's didn't work out, and the only thing that worked out was to go to do my 4 years of pediatrics in St. John's, Newfoundland. So that's actually where I went. Again, now, completely. When I told the devotees I was going to Newfoundland, they actually didn't even know where I was going. And even people in Canada, I'm sure many of you know. For those of you that are on the West Coast, have either some people maybe have just heard of Newfoundland. I'm sure most of you haven't gone there. And so it's just this part of Canada that really nobody really knows. And even if you're from Toronto, who goes to Newfoundland? So again, I set up for another adventure where I go out there not knowing what to expect, but feeling that I'm going to do whatever I can to take Krishna to wherever I'm going, whatever option I have. And so I was really fortunate at that time that although I was on my own, I had a good circle of devotees to be able to keep in touch with, which was really important for me to stay strong. I was really blessed that Bhakti Marg Swami, he was really kind, and he came every year to come and visit me while I was there on my own. And we started doing some preaching together at the yoga studios. And that was really beneficial, not only for my own spiritual life, but it gave me the opportunity to interact with like-minded people, because we're going to find a lot of times in our spiritual life, people may not be specifically practicing bhakti, but if they respect our devotional life and they're open to hearing, we should actually take the opportunity to spend time with these people as best as possible. So that finished. I finished 4 years. I finished 4 years there, and then I finally, eventually, after that, I worked for a little bit of time, not without many challenges that came before coming. I went to Ottawa and I was there for a year, and I was really fortunate to spend time with the community in Ottawa for a year. After that time of the year, I had to start working, and things were being held up here in Toronto for my work. So then I went back to Newfoundland to work. And at that time, I had this longing actually to spend dedicated time in spiritual life. When I was living in New York, I had been living basically with brahmacharis. And there was this real calling there to spend time in the brahmachari ashram, but I was in medical school, again, so much was going on. It was so hard for me to pull myself out of that situation. And I recognized in myself, and everybody has to go through this, their own situation, that do I want to become a brahmachari, or do I want to stay as a grahastha and work and have a family life? And I thought, for what I want to do in the world, I thought using my career as a doctor and as a pediatrician, I thought I'd be able to serve Krishna better than as a brahmachari, and so I decided to kind of stay that course. But I really wanted to spend dedicated time focused on my spiritual life. So after I worked for 6 months, I offered my respect to my parents, and I told them that I had done everything at their request, and now I'm wanting to spend time for myself. So I actually went to stay in the Brahmachari Ashram in Chowpatty, and that was one of the most incredible experiences that I've had, because for those of you that have been to India, specifically if you've been to the Govardhan Eco Village or Chowpatty, it's an incredible experience where there's such a strong potency in the spiritual atmosphere that even someone for myself who is just trying to be a devotee, it has the ability to make anyone a serious sadhaka. Really, it does. And so I would really encourage that if there's ever any time in one's student life to be able to even take out a little bit of time just to dedicate to their spiritual life, their sadhana, their seva, to really take this opportunity. So then after I was in Chowpatty in India for 3 months, I came back. I promised my parents that I wasn't going to become a brahmachari, and I had work set up for myself. I worked in Prince Edward Island for a couple of months. Then I finally came back to Toronto in 2015, and I've been here since, trying to serve here at ISKCON Toronto, but also with close connections to the devotees both in London and in New York, where I have a lot of close friends and seniors. And so right now, my main service here in Toronto is hospitality, trying to take care of the new devotees that are coming in, and trying to also encourage specifically the younger generation of devotees coming through, because I just feel that with the experience that I've gone through over the last 13 years, that we have some experience to share that's very practical, and with trying my best, we're going to try to share some things that hopefully can benefit the rest of the audience that's tuned in. So I want to start with that's just a little bit about myself, and I wanted to start with that because I think it's important to understand why I chose to speak on this topic. It's just because I feel that in my spiritual life I've had to really try to balance both work life, school life, spiritual life, and how do we juggle all the different balls. And it's not always a straightforward answer. It's not always going to be exactly this is what's laid out in the Shastra. So one thing we have to understand is what's described in Prabhupada's books, that is the standard, that is the ideal. And we may not necessarily be at that level. So we're here today to actually encourage everyone to say, that's not a problem. As long as we're willing to try and we're willing to take small steps, that's actually the most important thing, is to come to the standard. It's always, there's a famous saying, it's not about where you are, it's about where you're going that counts. Right? And that's actually the most important thing that I want to emphasize to everyone today, is that we actually are really trying to, with wherever we're at, that we're honest. Honesty is really the key to starting any revolution or change. And once we're honest with ourselves, I guarantee Krishna will always give us the opportunities to come closer to him. He creates different opportunities. We just show a little bit of effort. And definitely, I have tons of realization and a lot of experience where Krishna, with this famous saying that we take one step and Krishna definitely takes 10 steps to come closer to us. So on that note, we're going to actually start with, if anybody has any questions or comments, feel free to send them in right now. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the first question that I had been sent by Aditya. And so I'm going to go ahead and read the question, and we're going to be able to share a little bit about some thoughts on this. And so the first question is, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna tells Arjuna to not be attached to the fruits of his actions. How can we apply this in our material lives if we are not attached to the fruits? And how do we get motivated to study hard or to work as hard to achieve success? So this is a really interesting question. This refers to the section in the Gita where Krishna is actually, what he's trying to tell Arjuna is that as devotees, our responsibility is the endeavor. Our responsibility is the endeavor, and that we leave the results or the fruit, the fard, to Krishna. Now, this isn't always so easy in our day-to-day life. Many of you may have heard this story, this famous story during Kartik, that when Krishna and Yashoda when Yashoda is trying to wrap up Krishna, what happens is that every time she tries to wrap up Krishna, she's tying him up multiple times. And each time what happens to the rope? She can't fully finish. Why? Because she's always 2 inches too short. And those 2 inches, the Acharyas explain, have a very great significance in our spiritual life, because it's always important to acknowledge these two aspects that are occurring at each moment in our spiritual life. Is that these 2 inches, the first inch of that rope represents our endeavor, so our effort, and the second rope actually represents the Lord's mercy. So that without the two, nothing is possible. So this question is actually getting at is that we actually have to do our best effort. There's actually no getting around that we will sit here, expect positive things, great things, successful things to happen without actually our endeavor. But at the same time with our endeavor, there's also the Lord's mercy, Krishna's hand in everything that we're doing. So the reason why that's important to understand it is that we're actually in a great position. Our position is to give 110% our effort, but we don't actually have to be in anxiety about the result. Now that is definitely easier said than done. That's definitely, I can understand that it's definitely easier said than done, but I just encourage everyone to make even a small attempt to apply this consciousness to even something small that we're doing. Even let's say there's something that we're trying to do and we're not so stressed about getting the result. Again, it tends to be easier when we're not very immersed or attached to something, and obviously as the stakes increase, our level of anxiety increases, our attachment to things increase. But we should always understand, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna specifically says, "Kom te apate janihine name bhakta pranashati." And this is probably my favorite verse, because he says, "Oh Krishna, declare boldly that my devotee never perishes." And the reason why this is so encouraging, this is so extremely encouraging, is that Krishna actually says that wherever my devotee is at, I will always make sure that my devotee is successful. Now, when we interpret this verse, it doesn't always mean that we're going to be materially successful. When he says my devotee never perishes, Krishna is actually referring to my devotee's devotion, his bhakti, that will never perish if we're always just continually endeavoring. So another point just on this, recently Chaitanya Charan, he was in Toronto, and he made such a great point. He was talking about destiny. And a lot of times as devotees, we think, do we just accept what the result that Krishna has brought to us? And a lot of times it's hard to know, is this what Krishna really meant for us? Is this what Krishna wanted for us? And this concept of destiny. Now, the first point that he made that I thought was such a wonderful point was that he said that many times we hear the Gita, we're not the doer, we're not the doer, we're not the doer. And there's actually a point, and the reason why we say that is that we say we're not the doer, but actually Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he had such a wonderful way of explaining it, is that he says we are actually the doer, but we're actually not the sole doer. So what does that mean? That it actually means that we actually have responsibility in not only our material life, but our spiritual life, to act. And that is, so when we actually receive a result, we should say, yes, I was involved in acquiring that result, but we should acknowledge that we're not the only doer. And with that consciousness, that's always allowing space for Krishna's mercy and Krishna's role in whatever is coming to us, good or bad. And the wonderful point that he actually makes with regard specifically to accepting what has come to us in our spiritual life, and being knowing whether this is what Krishna wants. And the one thing that he really emphasizes is this concept of destiny. So destiny means, the reason why when people hear this word destiny, sometimes it can engender a little bit of complacency, that okay, what's coming to us is coming to us and I don't really need to do much, right? But the point was actually made when he was saying is that we should actually, the only time that we should actually, the word destiny or comes into the equation is actually when we have given our best effort. So if we actually have done everything that we can to make our best effort, that means that no stone is left unturned. No stone is left unturned in this endeavor of whatever service we're trying to do. And that if we have done everything, and if we've done everything we possibly done, then whatever the Lord gives us, we accept as the Lord's, as Krishna's will, as Krishna's mercy, then we can accept. But until that moment has come where we have not felt that we have given our best effort, then we actually can't say that this is actually what Krishna wants for us. Because then if we have tried 98%, we still have 2% more that we can try. So the whole aspect of this the whole basis of what this question is getting at is that there is, we have to be responsible in our spiritual life. It means that we also, whether it be materially in our studies or in our school or spiritually, is that we also, we are the doer, but we're not the sole doer, which means that we also have to take responsibility for what's happening in our spiritual life. And taking that responsibility always pleases Krishna, because we are always trying to see how we can improve, right? And if we are always looking at with devotional life, and not only devotional life but our material life, with how we can improve, then from there Krishna actually gives us the tools, the resources, the devotees, the people in our life to make that necessary improvement. So it's very, very, the principle here is, first of all, endeavoring to do our best. That's the first thing. And if we haven't done our best, then we actually must make that attempt to give it our best before saying that, okay, this is what Krishna wanted from us, because many times it's come up. But if we have given our best, then actually seeing that this is actually what this is actually what Krishna wants from us. So that there. So first of all, doing our best. Once we've done our best, trying to see what comes to us is what Krishna wants from us. And then the second point is being responsible. So taking ownership and actually trying to do our level best and do the best we can, make our best effort in our spiritual endeavor, and not only in our spiritual endeavor, but our work and our studying. So if there's any more questions, yep, there's a question. Okay, so I'm just going to take the question. So the question here is from Malvika. It says, can you give tips on time management efficiently as possible so we can practice our sadhana and pursue our career goals? Okay, so thank you, Malvika, for that question. And so this area of time management, it's a very, it actually comes to the crux of today's topic, is balancing material and spiritual life. Now, obviously, specific situations, our specific work situations, our study situations are different. But I will give general principles by which we can apply. And most of this is not going to come as new information, but trying to implement these slowly, I guarantee, will lead to success. So the first thing that I can say about managing our time, specifically to incorporate both our spiritual and material activities, is trying to plan how we use our time. So one may start even as simply as setting goals. So having goals, some people have weekly goals, some people have monthly goals, daily goals, weekly goals, monthly goals, and then yearly goals. So having a set of goals, then and not only having those goals, but having them in a way that we're always actually looking at them. So I actually always review my goals. My yearly goals, I try to review them multiple times a week. Why do I do that? Because it actually gives us, these actually act as a compass for how we are using our day-to-day time, our time in our day-to-day. So goal setting, first of all, is definitely very important. The second thing after that, specifically with regards to our spiritual practice, if we can basically plan our spiritual life in such a way that we know how we're going to execute it. So what I mean by that is that if we know tomorrow we're going to have a busy day, we actually plan for tomorrow today. So that means, what does that mean? That may mean that we, as simple as we prepare our prasad the day before. We have everything ready, it's in the fridge, it's ready to go. We plan our whatever we need for work the day before. Even as simply as planning what we want to wear. Many people know that there's many famous people in the world, they would wear the same thing every day. Why? Because then they wouldn't have to be so hung up in the morning and spend time figuring out what they were going to do. Steve Jobs is a very good example of someone who just wore simple, plain, same clothing every day. But again, this whole concept of planning your day the day before, and ideally planning the whole week, the Sunday before you start your week. That's actually something that I'm doing, that I've been trying to do for a little bit of time, and I can definitely say it has completely changed my life, because then when the days come, I actually already have a plan. I already have my day mapped out. I look at my day the day before, but I have the whole week planned actually the Sunday before the Monday starts. That's actually the best time. We can use some time on Sunday to actually plan out the week that's coming up. So what it allows us to do, it allows us to not only plan, but it allows us to say, okay, I'm going to need a little bit more time here. It actually will help us in our punctuality. And again, our punctuality is really important as not only as devotees, but whatever work we're doing, whatever job we have, whatever we're studying. This is actually, being punctual is actually an important aspect of spiritual life. And Prabhupada put a lot of emphasis on this. So for me, the most practical thing is trying to plan in advance, right? And with regards to our chanting and our spiritual life, what that may mean is that we've picked out a specific spot for our chanting. We have everything, we're ready before we start chanting. Maybe some of us need water while we're chanting. Maybe some of us have a specific book we'd like to read before we chanting. I like to read something before I start my chanting to help me concentrate. So that is close by. But everything that we need, the whole environment for our sadhana is actually ready before we go there. So it's not that we just walk into any room, but that we've created a sacred space or a specific area for our chanting, because we actually know that this chanting is actually going to be so powerful. That's actually going to be, some people have different ways of thinking about our chanting, but our chanting, I can assure you, that is actually the armor that we're putting on to go out into the world. That's actually the armor that we're putting out to help face all the barrages of different challenges that are going to come up. Many people will say that chanting our rounds in the morning, that's actually our immunization, our protection from all the forces that come to us, the forces of Maya, the different distractions, the different allurements that we have. That sadhana is really important. And therefore, the biggest point that I will try to emphasize with everybody out there today is trying to make some time in the morning for their sadhana. As busy as we can. I know for myself, I have a very busy lifestyle right now. I work nights. I have to sleep in the hospital. And so those nights that I have to sleep in the hospital, those are the only times where I actually cannot always wake up early to start my chanting, because I've had to have been up very, very late into the night. But as best as possible, any other day of the week, try to create some time and some small space to, again, protect ourselves. We should see the Maha Mantra and chanting the holy name is actually for our protection, right? It's for our protection. And so we should see our chanting as this is one of the biggest priorities in our day, and we should try to give Krishna some time in the morning hours. And why the morning hours? Because it's considered, this is the mode of goodness. It's actually the easiest times for us to chant. So if we're just plain and simply looking at chanting, specifically from the point of view of what's the easiest, the morning is the easiest time. I've experimented with every time of the day. I'm sure all of you have made some sort of experiment. The morning time by far. Why? Because this is actually how material nature works. Krishna says in these hours of the day, it is the most conducive for our spiritual life. The mind is at peace, the mind can be calm. All we have to do, all of us have known that when we woke up in the morning, there is a certain amount of stillness, so we should take advantage of it as best as we can in the early morning. The other point that I will just make about managing our time and balancing is one of the best things. This is going to take a little bit of self-reflection on everybody else's side, but knowing what our distractions are. So if we consciously think to ourselves, actually, these are the things that actually distract me on a regular basis, whether it be I need prasad, at a certain time, or I need to look at my phone, or I get phone calls at this certain time, or I like looking, spending time on the computer, or this book, or someone, this conversation. The more and more that we come into contact, or we understand what our distractions are, to that extent, we're actually going to be able to minimize our distractions, and we're going to be able to create an environment and also consciously know that when things come, we're able to recognize them and to know that we're not supposed to act on this because we know that's actually something that distracts us. So knowing our distractions, I say for myself, applying that has been really, really helpful. Trying to understand what my distractions are, what your distractions are. Make a list, have them, put them up, and constantly review what are your distractions, because I can guarantee that once we better acknowledge what our distractions are, that we're going to much, much better be able to face the different distractions that come to us, manage our time better, we'll have more of our time, and again, this will lead to a better balance. So, okay, so I know that's, I mean, again, the topic of time management and balancing our time, we can actually, there's a whole talk we can actually give specifically around this topic, and that may be something that we choose to do in the future. But for right now, I'll leave it at that, and I'll move on to the next question. So the next question that was sent was, we are advised to follow Dharmic principles in our material lives. So these Dharmic, yet my colleagues and or people that are in my class, they're so competitive. They will step on anyone to get to the top. If I don't stay competitive, I might get crushed. So how do I stay competitive and stay ahead of the rat race so that I don't lose out and yet remain devoted to the Dharmic principles? So this is also a really important question, and I'm glad that it was asked, because the nature of the world outside of when we're not with devotees and when we're not in the company of sadhus, when we're out in the material world, the environment is different. The energy that's very different. People are a lot more. People are looking out for themselves. It's survival of the fittest. You feel like you need to do what you need to do. And so, first of all, the point that I want to make with regards to this question is that whatever studying, so most of us, we may be in the times of our lives where we are unmarried and we're studying or we're work. So this actually refers to the brahmacharya time in our life. So many people may know what the four different varnas are. There's brahmacharya, which is student life, and that's usually for the first 25 years of our life where we're studying. And then after that, there's grahastha, where we're married. And then after we're married for a certain time, our children are grown up, we vanaprastha, where we leave family life to dedicate more of our time to spiritual activities. And then the last varna is sannyas. Now, specifically for most of us that I'm addressing today, we're going to talk about the brahmachari stage of life. And essentially for us, what that means is that we're at a time where we're studying. And to me, I personally, from my own life, I always was instructed and guided that actually your studying, or what we're studying and what we're trying to do in our studies, that's actually one of our most important services to Krishna. And we should see that what we're doing is actually our service to Krishna. Krishna says, whatever you do, whatever you're doing, make it as an offering to me. So the first thing that I want to say is that whatever anyone is pursuing, whether it be a job, whether it be whatever they're studying, see that as your service to Krishna. See that as what your offering is. I mean, there are so many times, many of you are going to be able to relate to it. I wanted to go to the program. I wanted to talk on the phone with devotees. I wanted to go somewhere else to be with devotees. But I had to study. Going through medical school for 4 years, going through residency for another 4 years. There is tapasya, right? And I'm not going to minimize that what we are going through as students and working, there is tapasya. And that's actually the quality that needs to be cultivated in the life of a student. right? That's actually a necessary quality as we move on into our life as grahastas. So I would say this opportunity, see it as an amazing, wonderful opportunity that we are actually getting this opportunity to practice tapasya, to study, to focus, and see that as our offering to Krishna. So that's the first point, is making our offering to Krishna. But then moving on and seeing that we are trying to do what we do for Krishna's service, but we see everybody around us. They are they're so competitive. So what should I do? And the way I've always seen it is that if what I'm doing, my studying, my work, if that's actually my service to Krishna, I give it 110%. That actually means, and maybe some people may not agree, and this has to be considered in people's circumstances. That means I'm also competitive, but the difference is that the goal, Prabhupada says, the person who is practicing devotional life and they're offering what they're doing to Krishna, and the person who's beside us who has no desire for any devotional life, what they're doing actually looks exactly the same, but the consciousness and the purpose are totally different. So in fact, we should be doing everything that we see those people trying to do. But there's a big but in the answer to this question. We're doing everything that we can possibly do, but not at the expense of our spiritual principles, at compromising our spiritual principles, compromising our vows. So if we are ever put in a situation where that we may necessarily, we give our best effort, but if we're in a situation where our principles, our vows, our dharmic principles are being compromised, that's the moment where we actually know. That is actually our litmus test to actually know that where we need to stop. That's actually where we know where our limit is. So that's actually the limit. And if we find that we're in a situation that we feel that our principles are going to be, our dharmic principles are going to be compromised, then we have to recognize, be honest, and we may have to actually remove ourselves from that specific environment. But I can tell you from my own experiences that if we are sincerely trying to follow the principles that Prabhupada has laid out for us, and if we are trying to follow properly and do our best, generally do our best, study as hard as we can, take care of ourselves, our body, because our body, this is a vehicle by which we're doing our service. It's the vehicle by which the soul is in. So the soul, the body is also seen as a temple. So we should take care of our body. We should try our best. And we are trying to do everything we can. We are trying to be we're trying to do everything that maybe necessarily the non-devotee is not doing in terms of trying to compete. But again, the litmus test or the limit is we are doing things as to the extent that our principles and our principles, our vows, our spiritual life is not compromised. So that is actually the way. And in terms of how we stay competitive, something I always think to myself is that we actually have the Supreme Personality, Krishna, on our side. That actually means that anything is possible. So I encourage everybody who is watching this, that we should actually think big. Think as big as you can for Krishna. There was a famous someone asked this question and Prabhupada once answered. He said that Krishna can give us everything. If he gave you the entire United States, if he gave it to you today, do you know what you would do with it? Right? So the point is that Krishna can give us anything at any time, right? But are we actually ready for receiving what Krishna is actually able to give us? And so from this point of view, we should always see, from that point of view, we should always see that we're always trying to situate ourselves and qualify ourselves for the mercy that Krishna is able to give at any point, right? So we should always think big for Krishna, always think big. There's never a time where we should not always be thinking the biggest. Why? Because everybody else, they're working on their own strength. They're working on their own good karma. But I tell everybody that everybody's good karma at some point will come to at some point has to come to an end. And then what happens? They actually have to experience the fruits of their karma. So we should always be endeavoring to do our best, but in a way that we're not breaking the regulative principles, because then we set ourselves up for karma that is not only going to be detrimental for us, but also going to be detrimental for our future. So again, I always say that when we're practicing in our day-to-day, that we should always be aware of where we're going. So the elements of the actions or the results of tomorrow start with today. What are we actually doing today? So that should always make us mindful of what we're actually doing in the present moment. And so that is those are a couple of the points that I wanted to make specifically about being competitive. It's not that we're not wanting to be competitive. We're actually trying to be competitive. We're trying to do everything we can, but our focus is we're doing this for Krishna. Krishna can give us anything he wants, and for that reason, we should be enthusiastic. Why? Because actually while the person who's acting on their own strength, they're gonna get as much as their good karma allows them. With Krishna, there is actually when we're working for Krishna, there's no ceiling. There is absolutely no ceiling to what can be achieved, and so therefore we should never we should always think big. We should always do the best that we can. But again, the principle is not at the expense of our spiritual principles and our devotional life. That's actually always going to be what anchors us, because Prabhupada always said purity is the force. So we may think that so many external things, that's actually what's making others more spiritual. Actually, whatever, to the extent that we become pure, we can actually try to help other people, right? So one famous brahmachari, he says, preaching in Krishna consciousness, it is nothing but an overflow of the happiness and the joy that we're feeling in our own spiritual life. So if we're not feeling anything, it's going to be very difficult to convince someone else to say, hey, let's do the same thing, right? So the more we focus on ourselves, that actual internal purity, that's actually what's going to have an effect on all the people we come into contact with. So that is the point that I wanted to make specifically on being competitive, what our consciousness should be when we're doing our work, and how we see that actually following the principles, we're actually never losing out. Definitely that's not the case. Why? Because we should understand that in Krishna consciousness, when for the small amount of devotional service we're doing, we're actually getting back thousands of times. Many people may know right now this is Purushottam Mas. Purushottam Mas comes once in every 3.5. It's a month that comes once every 3.5 years. It is Krishna's month, and it is said that whatever we're doing in this month, we're getting thousands of more times benefit than we would get in the month of Kartik, right? And many of us know that doing devotional service in Kartik is very auspicious. Whatever we're doing this month particularly, there is not even a multiple fold effect, a thousands and a unlimited amount of effect that's a benefit that we're getting in our spiritual life. So please never think that the time that we are giving to our spiritual life is lost. There is so much effect. Our conscious always has to be is that we are not looking for immediate results. We're always looking, again, with our devotional endeavor, there always must be patience. And so that is actually, if we imbibe that consciousness that Krishna will be there at our greatest need, that it will actually manifest if we're just sincere and we try. So that is a question that I wanted to address specifically with regards to that question. Again, if there's any questions that come as a result of the question, if someone feels like the question wasn't answered, feel free to chime in. And then the next question was, when I go to work, I see everyone around me drinking or partying, they're engaging in illicit relationships. How can they're breaking all the principles that we're trying to follow? How can I uphold my standards as a devotee and yet work with such association around me? So this is also a very good question, because it's for the person that actually asked this question, and many of us always, this is actually a question that comes when we're actually practicing as a new devotee, and something that I'm asking myself right now, right? Is this question of, we see so many things around us that aren't proper, and we immerse ourselves in that activity, around these people. So how do we stay strong, being immersed in all of that? If I haven't understood the question correctly, please Aditya or whoever else can clarify. But the first point that I want to say to this is that we're actually not going to be able to change always the external circumstances around us. So that's the first thing. So the second thing is that the point is that we actually have to understand that we are all given certain amount of spiritual potency, a spiritual amount of spiritual strength, and to that degree we're going to be able to be in certain environments. So that's actually for us to decide, when we're in a certain environment, how much are we being affected? Are we able to stay strong? Are we able to give our association? Or are we actually starting to notice that I'm being influenced? I'm actually seeing a consciousness change for myself. I'm being affected by what's around me. So that's the first point, is actually we have to first of all assess how much we are being affected. And to that degree, once we actually realize how much we are being impacted, then we actually make consciously the only practical step is that we may actually have to remove ourselves from that company, right? We may actually have to remove ourselves, or as much as possible, minimize our interaction time with things that are actively affecting affecting us. So that's the first thing. Now, the thing is that many of us may see that how come is it that other devotees can be in certain environments, but I'm not as strong as I can. So that's actually something that we have to understand, is that every devotee's capacity. I cannot actually imitate Prabhupada. I can't go into certain environments the way Prabhupada was able to go, or our seniors are able to go and have such amazing potency and amazing impact on the people around them. And that is because there's such spiritual potency, there's such spiritual strength there. We have to be honest and we have to acknowledge what our position is. But the way we can actually increase, the way we actually make ourselves more equipped to be in these situations, that is actually the first thing we talk about, is first of all our sadhana, our spiritual practice, how we are following the principles, and the second thing is who we are spending our time with when we're not in this type of company. So this company that you talk about, people who are potentially, perhaps they're non-devotees, perhaps maybe they're even people who are practicing as devotees and they're not able to come to the standard. But the point is that we have to see when we are as best as we can, we have to give ourselves the best company as possible. Sadhu Sangha, Prabhupada, he talked about this time and again. Most practically speaking, and I'm sure all of you know that from your practical experiences of being in school, of being at work, that our company, of who we surround ourselves around, makes a big difference. Now, I will give some very practical just advice from my own spiritual life. A lot of times I would be there earlier on when I would see that there were certain situations. I was in a situation where I didn't have any devotees at all, so I had to actually make friends. I had to actively make friends with people who weren't actually who weren't actually living the same type of life I was choosing to live, who were still living to, they didn't follow the principles. And I actually still had to make friendships with these kind of people. And actually the criteria that I actually used for being around people that necessarily weren't practicing devotional life, but they necessarily were good people, is to what extent do they respect you, and to what extent do they respect your spiritual life. So if we actually think about these two things, if they respect us, that means they're actually respecting Krishna. If they respect our spiritual life, people may say, I can never do what you could do, but I really respect that. And this is actually, we may, in company where we have no choice, I always gravitated towards the people that respected myself, respected my spiritual life, and overall were nice people themselves, but generally were people that were respected. There's always going to be people that may necessarily look at what we're doing as awkward, as different, as things that they can't really relate to, and you'll always get a sense for that. But I guarantee you, Krishna will always send people that will be favorable to our devotional life, that will not only be favorable, that will actually encourage you and support you, even if there are not devotees. So that's actually the point that I wanted to kind of make, and I think that goes into the next question. But how do we work with association that's not favorable? So first of all, asking ourselves, to what extent are we strong enough that we can be in the company of company that's not favorable for devotees, and still stay strong, because that capacity is going to be different for everybody. If we're being influenced, to recognize that, be honest, and to take a step back. There's nothing wrong with acknowledging that, because the first principle Prabhupada said is we must save ourselves before we save somebody else. So that means actually the importance is always, what is the environment that's actually best for our own Krishna consciousness, then if we are stable and secure, how we can actually help and serve others. But we cannot, the very important analogy, that if two people are drowning, if we can't actually help somebody else, if we're not swimming ourselves. And again, we know that generally, for anybody who's been on an airplane, this principle they always say, before putting your mask on a child, you always put it on yourselves first. Why? Because the whole principle is, you're not going to be there to actually put any mask on a child if you're not alive and healthy and growing yourself. So this principle is the same thing. We should first try to, as best, take care of ourselves, and then at the same time, not only try to keep ourselves strong, but then at the same time, as best as we can, try to help other people. So that's the first principle, is acknowledging where we're at. And then the second thing is always trying to really be honest about determining who we're spending our free time with, making sure that we are giving ourselves the best chance to be in the association of other devotees who are going to help us, who are going to encourage us to take that next steps, to give us that encouragement, to remind us of where we're all heading and what our goal is, and then the third aspect is our own sadhana. Our own sadhana is not only going to keep us strong when we're in these environments, but it's also going to give us the ability to have a greater effect when we are in this company. So those are a couple of points on how we can, we can be in this environment but still uphold our standards. So if there's any questions, again, please have them come through. But the next question is, so the next question is here is, how do I get myself to see my service as a service to Krishna? When I'm working or studying, I'm not thinking of Krishna, rather I'm thinking of the task at hand. Therefore, in my conscience is such, how can I actually see my work / studies as a service to Krishna? So this is a really good question, is that when we're actually performing whatever our service is, we're actually not always thinking about Krishna. So this is a great question, and I always think about the first example that we can actually give. Specifically, the most clear example we have for us is actually Krishna and Arjuna. So Krishna told Arjuna, he says, fight for me and I will take care of the result. So Arjuna, he actually had to be, to fight as a Kshatriya, you have to be in the mode of passion. Arjuna was shooting arrows, he was actually trying to kill people for Krishna. And Krishna, all he said is that as best as possible, what did he say? Mam anusmara yudhya chak. He says, remember Mam, yudhya, in the war, Mam anusmara yudhya chak. Try to remember me in the fight. This is in the Bhagavad Gita. He says, try to remember me in the fight. But if we can't, Krishna is, if we approach our whatever we're doing with the consciousness that this is for Krishna, Krishna is basically gonna, what does he say? He says he preserves what we have and he carries what we lack. And all of us are, Krishna specifically states this in the Gita, that whatever we are deficient in, that we can actually, so yes, one may say that I'm not able to remember Krishna at every moment. That's okay. We've already gone into whatever our duty is, whatever our service is, with Krishna in mind. So that's the first point. Our first point is that we may not necessarily have the awareness at that time to see Krishna at that very moment. I know for myself, I'll give you a simple example, is that so as a pediatrician, one of the things that I have to do is I have to be at the deliveries for babies who are born who may not necessarily do well. And a lot of times the baby comes to us and they're actually not doing well. So I actually have to use all of my knowledge and all of my skills to actually help the baby breathe and help the baby survive and help the baby as best as possible. And definitely in those times, I actually see Krishna manifest, because I am actually, what are we doing? We're trying as best as possible. Our consciousness is that I say, Krishna, give me the whatever I need to help to do this service as best as possible. That's actually my consciousness. We're chanting Maha Mantra. We're as best as possible. But still, when you're in the moment, you have to rely. You have to actually do your very best, and then we're relying on Krishna. So it's not that as a devotee, what we're trying to do is everything we're doing is an offering to Krishna. So if you're in that very moment and you're focusing on the task at hand, that's actually your service to Krishna. Don't worry about it. Krishna knows. Krishna knows. He sees our heart, right? He sees our heart. He sees our consciousness. He sees our motivation. It is okay if we're in that moment, but we're doing our best because we've already gone into any specific situation, and we know, Krishna knows, is that service is for him. So that's actually in our consciousness at the time. How do we see our consciousness? Our consciousness is that we are doing our service for Krishna, and that at that time we have to be immersed in the total chaos, stress, pressure of, let's say, an exam, a difficult situation, whatever it may be. I just gave a small example of myself where I regularly rely on Krishna. I always have to come home to my sister and I have to tell her these stories of what happens at work. And one day, there was this baby and they weren't doing well, and I thought, oh no, Krishna, we need your help. And I'm always calling out to Krishna within my mind. I said, Krishna, I can't do much, please help me. And my sister one time, she made a comment. She says, you have all these stories, and she says, every time you tell us, she said, my line is, oh, Krishna, he saved me, he bailed me out. And Krishna and my sister said, is Krishna gonna come every time? And I said, actually, Krishna, and so my realization at that time was that actually Krishna's coming in our life every day, but we don't have the vision to see it, right? And so that was actually my answer to my sister, is that actually Krishna will continue to come, and he actually comes for us every day, but we don't necessarily have the vision to always see it at that time, because we're looking at everything from what we're happening in our life from a material vision. But so what we have to do as devotees, there's going to be on the surface of the ocean, there's going to be waves and ripples. What we have to do is we have to actually go below the surface. Why? Because it's actually below the surface that what happens when we go below the surface in the water? It becomes calm. There's less ripples. There's no waves. So in that solitude, in that stillness, we actually are able to see Krishna's hand better in our day-to-day life. So that's just one example. I know that one devotee who was recently just telling me is that we should actually see whatever our day-to-day duties are, whatever we're studying, whether it be for our job, our profession. Prabhupada, he actually wanted us to actually be in positions. Aditya is going to become a pharmacist. I'm a doctor. Other devotees are engineers. Some people are IT experts. We all actually have our own service, and none of the services are more or they're less. All of them are actually equal, right? Because we're actually all of what we're trying to do is we're trying to serve Krishna in every capacity. But we should also see that what we're doing to get to the point where we need to do to serve in this capacity, that's our service, that's our austerity, that's actually a service. Prabhupada wanted us to be in positions in society where we could have an influence. So to always know that whatever we are doing to create influence, to take the message of Prabhupada, to take the message of Lord Chaitanya further, that's actually something that we should be enthusiastic about. We should be enthusiastic about trying to create more influence in the material atmosphere to bring the message of Krishna further. And if that means that we have to be immersed in our studies to become a doctor, a pharmacist, a pilot, a teacher, even parents. Even as parents, we have such a great opportunity to have an influence through our children, through the other people we interact with. The point is that our principle is taking the message of Krishna, of Prabhupada, to as many people as we can. And so we should actually see what we're doing as a great opportunity to whatever circle or society we may be in, to have that influence in that circle. So that's the consciousness that we should actually approach whatever work, studying, job we may have in our attempt to live as devotees, but also serve Krishna. So that was another question. Again, if anybody has any questions based on any of the information coming forward, please feel free to comment. The last question that was sent to me, and that I'll go forward is, we are always told to be humble. But the thing is, I find it very difficult to be humble at work because people tend to take advantage and step over me. I feel like I'm not as humble at work. Then that feeds into my personal and devotional life. And I'm not humble with devotees either. I find it difficult having two different personalities. Being humble at home and not being humble at work. How do I act? How can I separate and reconcile these two areas? So, I wanted to offer respects to whoever answered this question. This is a really important question, and it's again something that all of us as devotees sometimes we feel. Isn't it that we feel sometimes we have two different personas? We have the persona that we have where we're with devotees, and we have the way we are at work. And sometimes that may not be as humble. So I think, first of all, the point that I'll say is that we should actually, the point I want to make is that we are always trying to be humble. We're always trying to be helpful, but not to the extent where we are taking advantage of. So humility it does not mean that we are a doormat for everyone to walk all over of. If it has come to that point, then we actually have to stand up for ourselves. We actually have to rightfully accept what is ours, for our own well-being. So that's the first principle, is that we are humble, but we are not a doormat we're not basically humble to the point where people take advantage of us. That is not actually spiritual life. Spiritual life means that we know ourselves, we're strong within ourselves, we're always showing respect and trying to help others, but we have to understand that specifically in devotional life, bhakti, it's a very special thing. It's a very, again, why does Krishna specifically talk? If we look at the Gita and the way it's structured, chapters 7, 8, and 9, it's considered some of the essential secrets of bhakti. And one of the things that actually, one of the reasons why it's explained why these secrets are actually kept in it's actually described that in a book, a lot of people read the beginning and the end. But one of the reasons why Krishna saves this essential text of bhakti, he saves us for the middle, right? So this secret is not something you're actually going to go out and tell everybody, right? So the secret is something you have to endeavor for. You have to be inquisitive. You have to be sincere. And so that's actually why Krishna packaged these secrets, the essential secrets of bhakti, in the middle. The point that I'm trying to make about this is that we are actually, again, and this is where our own discrimination comes in. To the extent that our work environment allows, to the extent that people are respectful of our spiritual life, to the extent where we are going to be appreciated, to that extent we can speak, to be quote unquote ourselves in our own, as we would be necessarily with devotees. But if actually we've come to the point where we are not appreciated, people may not appreciate what we're doing as devotees because they don't understand. That's actually the point where we actually have to not only we have to withhold what we speak, but we also actually have to have a certain level of strength in these environments. So again, like I said, we're not at a point where we're looking for people to actually to take advantage of us. That is not spiritual, and that is not the way Prabhupada or any of our acharyas wanted to be. We actually, and that may actually come to the point, specifically when we're talking about working and living in the outside world, where we actually may need to be that's actually where we have to use our intelligence. We have to use our intelligence to say, okay, in this situation, I have to be firm. In this situation, I can't always be maybe completely honest because I know someone's going to take advantage, right? Even we see the examples in the Mahabharata, where necessarily Yudhishthira specifically, he was given a situation where for them to eliminate Dronacharya, he actually had to speak a lie, and he was actually Dharmaraj. He never spoke. He never spoke a lie. But this was actually what Krishna had asked him to for a higher principle. So to prevent people from being offensive towards the acharyas, towards Krishna, towards our spiritual masters, towards ourselves, that is actually to not be offensive, we must take the whatever the time, place, and circumstance calls in that situation to be a certain way, that we can always be in a way that people are most favorable and as best possible, most respectful, right? So that's actually, again, this is always going to vary from situation to situation, but sometimes the heart of bhakti, sometimes we may have to leave that at home, and it's actually okay to take on a certain character, a certain strength for the aspect of our working life. And so hopefully that in terms of reconciling these two areas, I hope we shared some points about how to reconcile the two. I think in terms of reconciling the two, if I had to kind of look back at my own spiritual life, again, I always see it as that whatever is going to promote or whatever is going to be the most favorable for the individuals around me. So we should always see first what's most favorable to us. If it's really disturbing our consciousness, if we don't have the ability to take what is coming to us, we may have to remove ourselves. But if we see we're in an environment where we have to necessarily assess how people are respecting us, how people are respecting our spiritual life, and to that degree we use our discrimination, and we are kind, we are giving, we are humble. All these qualities that are natural and are important as devotees, these are actually things that we reveal as the situation allows. And even sometimes that even happens in the circle of devotees, that we notice that we have certain association of devotees where people are really here, they're genuine, they're sincere, they're wanting to go deep. So the more intimate aspects of our character, of our bhakti, become revealed. The nectar of instruction, one important principle here that can be implied is that we reveal our mind in confidence, right? So that means what it means is that we can't be the same way. We can't reveal our mind the same way we are to everybody, because one of the 6 loving exchanges is that we actually reveal our mind in confidence. That means we actually have to use our discrimination. We actually have to see, okay, these are our seniors. They are looking out for me. They have the best intentions for me in mind. I can share in a certain way. I can open up. Okay, these people, they're my peers. They may not understand. So I have people that I can reveal my mind in confidence. I may not decide to share certain things. Okay, I'm outside in the outside world. These people may not necessarily understand at all about my devotional life. So I relate to them to the extent that they're able to, that I can be honest about myself, and also in a way that, again, we are trying as devotees, when we're coming to a situation where we may be around people that are not practicing devotional life, my consciousness is how can I be that I'm honest with myself, but trying to assist people in a small way as possible, come closer to Krishna. One of the things that Randan Swami, he always tells is that preaching is not actually about making someone a devotee or making someone completely Krishna conscious. Preaching and sharing Krishna consciousness is actually about doing what is most favorable for that individual to take them one step closer to Krishna. So that means that one step, you may only be in charge or be involved in that one little step. So we should always see, we shouldn't overestimate our purity and our ability to make a change. But if there's some small way that we can help those around us, for example, something that I did practically for myself when I was always surrounded by colleagues. Again, I have to go to people's houses. I have to do things in such a way that, or I have to still be of the world. So one of the things that I always did, my friends always knew, Raseshwar Madhava is always going to bring something he's always going to bring some food to the event. Why? Because prasad is going to be their their small little step closer to Krishna. So again, that involves where we have to use our discrimination on how we can reconcile both our personal devotional life and also our work, our material life, and also how we interact with other devotees. But the principle I will always say is we should look at every situation as first what is best for our own spiritual life, what protects it, and then after that, what is most beneficial for the people around us. So those are the questions that I had moving forward. And I think that also just will address the question. There was a question that came through specifically about how should we so it's how we should be, basically how to deal with non-humble devotees. Okay, so that's a fair question. How to deal with non-humble devotees. The first thing in our devotional life is that we're first of all always, the first principle is that we're always, again, what we said, we're always trying to take care of our own spiritual life. So that means a lot of times we may not necessarily be able to influence others, we are trying to do our best. And so a lot of times when we as best as possible, one of the ways I always and this is something that we can use both in our day-to-day life too, but people that I don't necessarily see eye to eye with, whether it be family members, maybe people who are not devotees or who are practicing spiritual life, the first thing I do is I look at their qualities that I'm not so happy with. First thing that I do, and this can be applied to everyone, is what qualities do they have that I actually see in myself? Because we are actually also not, we also should always look at ourselves and how we can improve. So to that extent that we can see some shared quality between myself and the person we may not see eye to eye with, to that extent we're going to be able to be compassionate towards them. So that's the first principle. The second principle that I want to emphasize here is that when it's difficult for us to appreciate the devotees that may not be humble, first of all, we should always practice the element of gratitude. So in our not only in our material life but our spiritual life, it's so difficult to be patient and to actually recognize what good we have in our life. So one of the things that I personally do for myself is that every night before I go to bed, I try to think about 5 things, even if it's 3 things, or even one thing that I'm actually grateful for in my life, in my spiritual life. And if we actually practice that gratitude, then actually what that does is it always moves our consciousness into seeing the cup not half empty, but half full. And that is actually the key, is that in our devotional life, there's going to be so many challenges that we're going to come across. But our conscience should be that Krishna will always take care of us if we are sincere, but we should always work on our conscience to see how we can always put ourselves in the best frame of mind. And that practice of gratitude, even every day, if we can practice it, that's gonna actually be what helps us deal with the devotees who are not humble. Because naturally, it's gonna bother us. It's gonna get on our nerves. It's gonna actually just make us really upset and angry. So the first thing is that we do our service to the best we can. Whatever impact that has on somebody else, great. As best as possible, we work on ourselves. But to encourage others, the best way we can do that is first by leading by example, right? So sometimes we will say things over and over again to devotees, and they may not actually get it. That's actually our cue, at least for myself. That's my cue to say, okay, that this is the time that the consciousness of what we're trying to teach them, they're actually not ready. So what we have to do in those situations is that we perform our service, we do our best, we do it as best as we can, trying to be a good example for others to follow. And at that point, then what we do at that point, the best we can do is we can pray sincerely to Krishna for for whoever, devotees, non-devotees, to accept and to understand what we feel would be best for them. And then honestly, after that, Krishna will come in a certain way if our prayers are sincere to help these people. So this is specifically addressing the point how we deal specifically not only with non-humble devotees, people who may not be practicing devotional life, is that we try our best to be the best example we can be. We pray for them, and then we wait for Krishna's intervention. I think, right, so that actually hits on the point of humility, first of all. And one of the things that I will share for myself, this goes back to the first question about tips about time management. I think even for time management, we talked about the higher principle of goals, but then even beyond goals, having a vision for our life. So I encourage everyone to have a vision statement for our life. And what that means is, what principles do we want our whole life to act upon? And one of mine that I'll share for everybody, because it's actually the mission statement, the vision statement for my entire life, that is actually something that I heard from His Holiness Radhanan Swami. And he said in a class one time, I heard this back in 2010 and it's never left me. He said the greatest compassion we can have in this world is to be a good example for other people to follow. Now, if we really, really think about it, I read this every day as much as I can, or as often as I can, because what this principle really tries to imbibe, it first means, to be a good example means that we first have to take the medicine ourselves. We have to actually apply the principles of bhakti, take the principles that have been laid out to us. We must, as best possible, internalize them in ourselves. And in doing so, that is actually, and in doing so, then try to go out and try to be a good example for others to follow. And Maharaj said specifically, this is actually the greatest act of compassion. So we're all looking to see how we can help the world. And so it's said here in this saying that the first act of compassion is actually charity to ourselves. So I encourage everybody at this time, with whatever they may have taken through this session, is that we may want to help so many people. So many people may actually need to improve on certain things that we're doing already. But the best consciousness to be is not how we are better with other people, but first how we can apply to ourselves and how we can improve. These two frames of reference will always keep us safe in our spiritual life. It'll always keep us enthusiastic, and it'll always keep us in a mind frame of wanting to learn and wanting to grow. Because actually that's ultimately how we are advancing our spiritual life. It is foolish to think that we're actually advancing on our own strength. We are advancing by our best endeavor, but also by the mercy of the devotees and the mercy of the Lord that's coming through the Vaishnavas and through the devotees that we spend our time with. So this is really something that I guess as we're coming to an end, I wanted to just leave everybody with, is that as we're thinking about how to balance, we talked about a lot of maybe hopefully some relevant topics that people can take away. We talked about time management, some principles, practical principles, and again, we can do a whole session on time management for devotees in the future. But thinking about, okay, how we're planning our time, how we're setting our goals, but also what kind of vision we want to have for our life. So having a vision or a mission statement for our life. I very much encourage all the devotees to make some time for this, because it will really serve as a great compass amongst the storm. One of the ways that I used to increase, because when I was in medical school, I wasn't chanting 16 rounds because I was so busy studying. And one of the ways that a practical, really easy way is that when we want to try to increase our spiritual life, one of the practical ways that I can encourage everybody else, what I used to do is whenever I had vacation, so whenever I had Christmas holiday, whenever I had summer vacation, whenever I had any sort of holiday, that would be the time that I would actually increase my sadhana. That would be the time where I'd increase or implement anything new. So why did I do it then? Because that's the time when we have vacation, when we have some time off, we're actually relaxed, right? So it's in that time of being relaxed where we can try to actually increase or try to make a little bit extra endeavor. And what are we doing in that time of being, when the sea is calm, we're trying to actually improve ourselves as much as possible. Why? Because then when the storm hits, we're actually more grounded, we're more rooted. So I would increase my chanting during those times when I had a little bit more time, I had a little bit more flexibility, vacation time. I always consider vacation time as the time where I'm trying to actually maximally try to increase whatever I can in my sadhana, in my spiritual life, in my reading, whatever I was trying to pursue. Because it's those times that you're trying to basically prepare yourself for the storms. Because we shouldn't kid ourselves. We shouldn't minimize the fact that in spiritual life, the storms are coming. That is definitely there. Not because I am saying so, but practically speaking in our life, we actually all know this. In our own lives, that what I'm saying is nothing new. But this is actually, the more we take shelter of Krishna, of our chanting, of what Prabhupada has gave us in his books, of the devotees, the more we take shelter of this in the times where we are able to take advantage again. Take advantage of what we've been given, then share it with others. But the more we've actually taken advantage of what we've been given, appreciate what we have, really appreciate it. Because the more time we give, the more we are willing to be inspired by devotees, the more we're actually able to take instruction. And this does involve willing to be sincere to take guidance, instruction from those that we respect, and from those that we actually see that have our best interests in mind. If we see our seniors, they really care for us, they're really trying, they want us to advance, then we should gratefully accept their instructions and try as best possible, because actually the safest place to be in our Krishna consciousness is one that we are trying our best and that we are trying to fulfill the instructions of our seniors. That's actually the safest place to be, because then Krishna sees that we're always in the mood of trying, if we're honest about where we are, and we're always trying our best. So these are coming. Let's see, it's coming up to 4 o'clock. I wanted to come and end it. If there are any more questions, please feel free to. What you can do, if there are more questions that are after this, what we're gonna do, what I'm gonna do is, in answering Malvika's question about time management, I'm gonna send out maybe some practical things tools that people can use to organize their time, how to set goals. We'll send out things to Aditya. So for those of you that saw the poster, Aditya's email address was on this. If you actually tuned into this session, please email that email address that was actually on the poster. If you saw the poster, please email Aditya, and then what we'll do is basically we're going to start a community of people for us, all of us, to stay in touch. That will allow us to basically, you can ask me more questions. I'll do my best. If you want to speak, I'll try to make an effort to speak if there's any more specific questions that you had in regards to your situation. We can basically create an environment and a sangha where we're honest about where we are, and we are just having, we're enthusiastic and we're having fun together in our spiritual life. Because spiritual life, actually, this is actually what we, to give up the things that may be difficult in spiritual life, we have to have what Krishna talks about, param trishna nivartate. We actually have to be having that higher taste. And so why not do it together? So on that note, I wanted to thank everyone genuinely for coming out and for listening. If there's anything that I said that may have offended anyone, I'm sorry. It's actually a little bit different speaking to a camera. I wish all of you were actually around me, but hopefully people were able to take something out. And again, like I said, if people are wanting to stay in touch, please email Aditya, and we've tried to start a community of devotees across Canada and wherever you are to talk about discussion, to have discussions like this, and to encourage people as best as possible, as much as we can. Hare Krishna.